NFL fans, happy Wednesday. And not only that, but I can now say happy New Year. Yes, happy NFL New Year. We just passed 4 o'clock Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, which means we are now officially into the new NFL year, meaning all those teams had to get under the salary cap. They are now free to talk and sign. They've been free to talk to, but now they can sign all these free agents you've been hearing about. We're going to get into the free agency period, the tampering period we just got through, and now moving forward into the new league year. I am Scott Gulbransen, your host. I'm joined by the founder of the Los Angeles Football Network. That is Mr. Ryan Dyrud, who joins us from Los Angeles as he does every week. And do us a favor. If you haven't already subscribed to the Sportsnaut YouTube channel, what are you waiting for? Do us a favor. Subscribe. Hit that notifications bell. Give us a thumbs up, too. We would appreciate that. But if you get that notifications bell in there, too, that means every time we have a new video or we go live like this, guess what? You're going to find out. You'll be the first to know. So thank you for that. But, Ryan, here we are. It's been a really busy week here at Sportsnaut. I know it's been out there for you, too, at LAFB. So much going on. And of course, at the last minute, we knew the team on your coast over there, the Chargers in Los Angeles, had to get under the cap. They released Mike Williams. Khalil Mack is staying. There's so many storylines happening right now around the league, especially with those teams that had to get under the cap by the deadline at 4 p.m. Eastern. Not surprised how crazy it was on Monday. And I think we're going to see more action through the rest of the week as well, now that we're into the new year.
Yeah. It's always fun. Good to see you, Scott. Glad to be here chatting on the NautZone. But yeah, it's always a wild week for agency, and it always happens on Monday. You know, the league year starts Wednesday, but Monday, Tuesday are the big days. So most of the big name players off the board. We'll see those official contracts all spill throughout today and tomorrow, but unless something falls through, which we did see one kicker contract fell through on Monday. Will Lutz went to the Jaguars for a couple hours, then he ended up re-signing back with the Broncos. So technically, until that ink is on paper today and tomorrow, those reported numbers and signings from Monday and Tuesday can change. It rarely happens, but wild couple days, and there's still some names out there that can have an impact. So, still plenty of work to do here.
There is. And we're going to talk about the number because you see numbers out there. You see X million and X million for X years and all that stuff. And when you dig down in the numbers, one of the things we want to kind of teach you about today is the fact that you see that big number, but that's not, in the NFL especially, that's not the guaranteed money. It's the guaranteed money if you're worried about your team's cap structure or the fact that they signed somebody to a long-term deal and that they're on the hook for all that money. When we talk through that a little bit, we'll tell you kind of what the truth is. Like, here's the headline and here's the truth when it comes to those. But we'll start with some of these signings. I mean, we start off with the big ones. Kirk Cousins goes to the Falcons. Nobody really surprised there. Although I have to say, Ryan, I don't know if you're in the same boat on this. And we have a sister site, the Minnesota football fan, sports fan, excuse me, who's part of our network. But I really believed that Cousins would go back. It seemed to me like he's happy there. He's a family guy, likes it there, everything you've seen. But boy, the Falcons come at him hard with a great offer. And there's no question that Kirk Cousins deserves to be in the Hall of Fame when it comes to signing contracts. I'm not talking about playing, but you look at the deal he signed going back to Washington, then Minnesota. Now he goes to Atlanta. Boy, just a little bit surprised there, but clearly Atlanta needed the quarterback, and he seems to be a good fit there.
Yeah, I was the same with you, Scott. I thought he would stay in Minnesota when it was said and done. Just seemed to love it there. Family's there. Obviously, we got to watch him on that Netflix show Quarterback, which I thought he stole the show. I thought he was so good. And, the Coles man and all the fun stuff. And just, seems like a very down-to-earth kind of humble guy. Not that has to do with leaving to go to another team, but, it just seemed like he was happy and content in Minnesota. And in my opinion, we don't know what the numbers that Minnesota was offering. I can't see it being way less than what Atlanta offered. I know all throughout, but once the season ended, everyone kind of knew he was going to get, about 50 per year. Yeah. And Minnesota was trying to do a 2 to 3 year deal, and he ends up getting a 3-year deal in Atlanta. So I have a feeling the numbers weren't much less. I could be wrong. We'll hear probably, I'm sure stuff will come out later. To me, this feels like him looking at both rosters and at his age, what is he, 36, 37?
Yeah.
And truly believing based on division, based on rosters, that Atlanta gave him the best shot to go win a Super Bowl before he hangs it up, because that's the one thing missing from his resume. I mean, everyone can talk about him in big games of that. Statistically, he'll go down as one of the top quarterbacks in football. Statistically, every year he's great.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously you mentioned the contracts. He'll be number one in football, but he doesn't have, never had a deep playoff run, period. Not even a Super Bowl appearance, just not a deep playoff run. So I feel like when you look at, and this is weird to say with where Atlanta was last year and they have a rookie head coach, but based on the offensive weapons he has, based on their cap situation, who they were able to get, we haven't dove into it too much yet, Scott, but I have to think he thought Atlanta gave him a better shot to reach the pinnacle than Minnesota, who's losing Danielle Hunter, who still there's unknown about Justin Jefferson, who, obviously Alexander Madison, they waived their running back. So, they did get a good one in his place, which we'll talk about, but that's the only thing I can think of is Atlanta just gave him a better shot to make a Super Bowl.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes sense. Like, I get it. You have to go where you think you're going to have the best chance, because you're right. At that age, you're starting to think about, okay, I got some good years left in me, but they're numbered. And so if I want to go somewhere to win, because at that point, like I said, he's Hall of Fame contract guy. So that means he's got enough money. He doesn't need to worry about the money.
Yeah.
Money is obviously important, so he gets compensated to go to Atlanta, but at the same time, feeling like he's got the tools there. He's got a good young running back there, you name it. And obviously the coach, Raheem Morris, is a good one too. So you're in a good situation. So you can kind of see that. So some of the other big names, Chris Jones re-signs in Kansas City. I think they're still trying to move Ladarius Sneed, which is interesting because of the age difference there. I get Chris Jones, how good he is. They give him the deal, and I don't understand the Sneed stuff because he's younger. I get that they have to watch the dollar figures there and the salary cap. But that's a weird one to me that, in essence, it seems like now they may end up keeping both. Of course, Patrick Mahomes restructured his contract during the last few days to allow $35 million in cap space. But Sneed wants a new contract. He's going to come at a higher price, obviously being tagged. I don't get that, though, because Chris Jones, great season and a great player, but that age is the thing that worries me for them.
Yeah, the age, and it's a hard conversation, because I mean we could argue that Chris Jones is probably second best interior defensive lineman after Aaron Donald. Is that probably fair?
I think that's fair.
And so in terms of positional ranking, he's probably above where Sneed is, but Sneed is, what would you say, top 5 corner in the league right now?
Absolutely. 100%.
And with their age and with the impact that each player has, it's hard to look at last year and the year before. You got to think about the future. And I think a lot of these teams, and I've said this before, I don't try to pretend like I'm smarter than these GMs and guys, but sometimes I think they sign based on what has transpired instead of based on what the future can hold. Yeah. And I think Sneed probably has a higher upside over the next 4 to 5 years than Chris Jones does. Maybe next year Chris Jones is still a higher upside, but when you look 2-3 years down the line, Sneed seems like the more likely centerpiece for that defense. And based on what they did, they either don't think that or just aren't thinking that way and just trying to continue on this 1 year window by year kind of thing. So surprise as well. But as soon as they franchise Sneed, we all kind of knew this was what the path they were taking.
Correct. But the only reason that you would have to move him is if he doesn't want to play in Kansas City. Yeah. And some players, they don't get a new deal. They feel like they need a new deal and they want out. If that's the case, I understand it from that perspective. That would be unfortunate for everybody involved, because I think clearly for Kansas City, it played amazingly last year for them in their second consecutive Super Bowl win. So we'll see what happens there. And it's interesting, the interior of the defense. Now you look at how money is doled out in the NFL currently, especially with free agents. You expect big money deals for edge rushers. It's a premium position. You expect it for the cornerbacks too, as well. And then you look on the offense, some of the sides like quarterback and wide receiver. But we had, of course, Danielle Hunter go to the Houston Texans. He's an edge rusher. But Christian Wilkins, the other kind of premier interior defensive guy, goes to Las Vegas and gets a huge deal there too. But I think once those two guys, they get the big deals, and that's kind of it. Because they, like you said, Aaron Donald's at the top of that list too. He's signed. He's not going anywhere. But you look at that situation, and it's like you're usually not getting interior guys getting huge deals like that anymore. So those three guys, in essence, are the two that were free agents this year, Jones and Wilkins, get big deals, which is just odd to me because usually you just don't see that happening on the interior.
Yeah, it's not often. I think I remember Calais Campbell few years ago, got a pretty big deal at the interior. But you've got to be a multifaceted interior guy to get that. Like you
Right.
can't just be a run stuffer. Like you've got to be able to get quarterback pressure as well, which I think both those guys do. And that's why Aaron Donald's always been one of the highest paid defensive players, period, because, he's a sack artist from the inside,
From the inside.
along with everything else he can do. And no one's on that level. But yeah, I mean, it is interesting. And I think too, when you look at specifically the Vegas one,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not even talking necessarily number, but you think about the idea of, having Wilkins on the inside next to Max Crosby, all of a sudden that becomes one of the best defensive line units in all of football. Because if you compare so many, I'm not just saying fans, but like a lot of people think like, okay, we need two premier edge rushers. In reality, you just need two premier defensive linemen. And if you can get one on the inside and one on the edge, that's almost better because it makes you more versatile than just having two edge guys. We've seen it with the Chargers, right? Like we thought they had two with Bosa and Khalil Mack, but they didn't have a true premier inside guy. They had some good rotational players, and Tui Pelotu, I think, can slide in there going into the second year and be fairly good. But if you have a true Pro Bowler on the inside and a Pro Bowler on the outside, you're a force to be reckoned with because you can come at teams a number of different ways. And so the Raiders are a winner in that, in my opinion.
Yeah, so those two guys go. And then I want to get back to Danielle Hunter because to me, obviously a big signing. But past that, holy moly, the Houston Texans, Ryan. So we saw what the Texans did last year. Of course, they lost in the playoffs to the Baltimore Ravens, but CJ Stroud, Rookie of the Year, we saw what they were able to do. And you look at what D'Amico Ryans did down there. Amazing job coaching that team, putting that team together. Everybody thought they were going to be a 4 or 5 win team. Mm-hmm. They go out and make the playoffs. Now we talk about them signing Danielle Hunter. They've signed Danico Autry. Okay. Mm-hmm. They've signed also Noah Brown from a wide receiver perspective. They even went out and got Tommy Townsend, the punter, formerly the Chiefs.
Joe Mixon also.
Joe Mixon, they traded with the Bengals. Jeff Okudah, former first-round draft pick, a 1-year deal for $4.75 million at cornerback. And you just look at, Lonnie Johnson at cornerback. They have gone out. Now they re-signed Dalton Schultz too, who was such an important part of their winning ways last year. You look at, now we knew they had a ton of cap space. We just didn't know that they would spend it all in 2 days, Ryan. You look at them now, everybody's talking about the top of the AFC, and the AFC is obviously crowded at the top. When you look at Baltimore, you look at Buffalo, you look at Kansas City, you look at Cincinnati with Burrow, if they regain their form, and then you look at even Miami to a certain degree, although they didn't win very many big games. But you look at the AFC and how stacked it is, and then you see what Houston did in 2 days, and they still got the NFL draft to pick up some folks too. I'm really just impressed. They are not only going for it, but they're doing it in a really smart way. If you look at the signings they've had, not a ton of outside of the Hunter deal, not a lot of money that they have to put up long term. So if some of this stuff doesn't work out, they can quickly move on. So they seem like they're going to be a big time, as long as everybody plays up to their ability and we see a good sophomore year, in essence, from CJ Stroud. This team's going to be tough.
Yeah, they've had maybe one of the best off seasons so far. I think we talked last week, Scott, about the potential teams that could make the biggest splashes and have the biggest impact in free agency. And two of the ones we listed were the Texans and the Colts. And, Colts haven't done a whole lot. Obviously lost Gardner Minshew, and they did sign their nickel corner to become the highest nickel corner. But Texans, I think, have knocked it out of the park because, as you mentioned, they did one big name, big contract, Danielle Hunter, and the rest are all kind of rotational, positional guys that will have an impact. But if they basically low floor, high ceiling guys, right? Yes. They come in, they're not given crazy contracts to. If they come in and don't have a huge impact, hey, we didn't lose a whole lot. These weren't like 5-year deals, $100 million guaranteed, but they can come in based on draft position, based on some talent they've shown throughout the league before, and have a really big impact and surprise people and be those kind of darlings that were signed. And everyone's like, wow, those were what make you GM of the year, executive of the year, is signings like that. So knocked out of the park. What D'Amico Ryans and they're doing over there, I think is pretty incredible.
Now, on the other side of that scale, Mr. Dyrud, is the Dallas Cowboys. What are the Dallas Cowboys doing? Like, I just don't get it. Like, with the needs that they have, offensive line, other areas, running back, they have not done anything. Now, I'm not saying you just do stuff to do stuff, but clearly the Cowboys, you figured would be players early on in free agency, and it's been complete crickets down at Jerry World.
literally the only team that has yet to sign one player, right? They don't have a lot of cap. They only have like, $2 million or whatever. But you figure like every other NFL team out there, they'll restructure some guys and get some. And, it's not a team right now as constructed that's going to win the Super Bowl. So unless they think they have the pieces and then they can just fill the rest in the draft and that'll get them over the hump. But, they lose Tony Pollard. They've lost other players and they've done nothing. So I don't know. Everyone talks about it. He'll go. He's a Hall of Famer, or he will be. But it's high time that they need someone down in Dallas that's running the show besides, Jerry Jones and his family if they ever want to get across the finish line. Because, it's kind of they've tried a lot of things. He's obviously done some good things, but they need someone else that's maybe a little different thinking because it's just, no signings. I don't know what else to say.
Now, let me ask you this, like off the top of your head, when you look at teams, their needs, and the free agents that were out there, what was the biggest signing for a team? Like what signing is going to impact? I mean, I know we can talk about Kirk Cousins because quarterback is the most important position in the NFL, but is there another signing that you look at and you say, wow, that was great for them? Or maybe it was a little under the radar, good signing for a team that needed a couple pieces to kind of put it into the contention conversation?
Yeah. The Kirk Cousins, obviously, but we won't get into that. That's, anytime you get a big name quarterback, that's the number one signing in free agency. But I'll give you one and then maybe you give me one and give me some time to wrap more around because it's a great question. But I'll start with, just an easy one since I cover them. I think the Rams did a good job in signing Jonah Jackson. We talked about it a bunch on our show on Monday. We went live last night on our Rams LAFB channel. If any Rams fans are out there, you can check it out. But the Rams, what's been interesting is they've cultivated an entire ideology shift in this McVay era. Like in the pre-McVay years, or not pre-McVay, in the beginning of the McVay years, there was always, the famous 11 personnel. It was glitz, it was glam, it was high fast offense, it was zone running scheme, big plays and all that. And last year they shifted to, a gap run scheme away from the zone. And now they're really investing in the offensive line. Outside of Andrew Whitworth in free agency, 5 years ago or so, they've never really invested heavily in the offensive line. And they re-signed Kevin Dotson, who was their premier guard they got last year. They re-signed him to $16 million, and then they go and get, or $60 million per year. And then they go and get Jonah Jackson from Detroit, one of the premier guards as well, and give him also $16.5 million. So they've allocated a lot of money to the offensive line. And we talked, it's a little rich for me for paying two guards, upwards of $30 million in cap space between two guard positions, but they got to protect their older quarterback in Matthew Stafford. They want to establish the run again more so frequently with Kyren Williams. And so they went and did that. So I think that was a really a statement in what their vision is going forward away from what they used to be. And then B, and just, getting ahead of the Dotson signing before free agency actually started and then immediately getting Jackson. And so their offensive line is kind of set.
Yeah. It's a good one. I agree with that. Very good take. I think for me, and this is going to be more of an under radar, especially since he's getting up there, but he's still very productive. And that's the Danico Autry signing in Houston, because Jonathan Greenard, who was their leading pass rusher last year, left, right, to join the Vikings. So they lost that. They fill it with Danico Autry again, who I think gives them someone that slots right in there and is a little more athletic and gives them the opportunity to improve on that defense. And to me, that Houston defense is sneaky good. And I think adding Autry there with everything else that they have now with Danielle Hunter on the inside, it blows my mind how they have the combination of young players on those young rookie contracts combined with these veterans. So that locker room to me also is going to get really good for Houston. And it's hard for me to look just past what they've done, not the totality of it, which we've already talked about, but I think in the Autry signing, they make up for that. So that's my quick pick off the top of my head when it comes to that. And of course, you can go team by team. There's a lot of good pickups, but a lot of those teams also had holes created. We talk about Minnesota with the quarterback. What do they do now? Okay, we know about the one signing, but you look at the opportunity for them now. They're going to move up and be players in the draft for a quarterback. New England continues. They signed Jacoby Brissett, but are they still going to, at number 3, take a quarterback there? So many questions answered. Some of the teams that we saw, like Atlanta, was in the quarterback derby. Now, obviously, they're going to drop down. You would expect them maybe, just maybe, unless they go for a big wide receiver or something, you would expect them to trade down. So the whole impact, that's the other thing I always tell people, Ryan, is You watch free agency, and even if your team doesn't do a ton or makes a couple moves here and there, watch how it impacts the draft. Because if those teams address needs in free agency and they no longer need to draft that position that's at the top of the draft, suddenly their players you might be able to trade down, get more draft capital, still get what you need, but become richer because of it. So I think that's something that we got to watch and we'll look at. And I know in coming weeks we'll start to take a look deeper into that.
Yeah, yeah, and we've talked about it before. Like the goal is obviously you want to build your future team in the draft, but the goal is you never want to go into a draft with needs for that year. And obviously that's
Correct.
easier said than done. A lot
Sure.
of teams are going to have needs no matter what. But your goal is to go into the draft and being like, okay, for this year, we're good. Anyone we get that can start from this draft is a cherry on top, or we knocked it out of the park.
Yeah.
And so when you look at teams like that, they were able to fill those needs, and now they're kind of playing with house money, and they can take advantage of other teams that didn't fill those needs. Like maybe the Cowboys, they can take advantage of and get more draft capital to move up or down or whatever, because other teams are in somewhat panic mode because they weren't able to maybe fill those needs, and so this is where we really see kind of the chess moves. And in free agency, again, you ever want to build a championship team in free agency,
Right.
but you want to fill needs and then get some sprinkles, some dressing, if you will, and then use the draft to kind of build that then for the next 2, 3, 4 years down the line. And if you get someone that can start day one, great, but that's not what you should plan for. And anyone that does is either getting very lucky or they're going to be very bad for many times. So
Yeah.
what you see. But there's also the other side, Scott. And I'm curious your thoughts on this, because I kind of joked about it. I can't remember if it was last week or 2 weeks ago at the Jacksonville Jaguars, but there's those teams that seemingly are always big spenders in free agency and yet always remain at the bottom of the NFL. And obviously, it all depends on who you sign, but we see these teams every year. It's like, oh, wow, what a great free agency. Like, they sign this guy, they get this piece, they do that. And then it just never pans out for him. Like, are you on the, like, let's just say you're a GM, you go in with, 50 million in cap. So it's like, you got good money to play with, but you're not like 100 million where you're like rebuilding your whole team. Are you on the side like, hey, we got to spend that entire thing, go get some big splashy plays, or like, you know what, we only really need to spend 2 to 3 guys that we fill here and we can save the rest for in-season stuff that we need? Like, what are you kind of in the mold for?
Yeah, I'm with the latter there, because I think you look at it from the perspective of where are you in the continuum of competing for a championship, winning a Super Bowl. Okay, so if you're a team that went 8-9 or went 9-7, just missed the playoffs, or you're a team that just got into the playoffs, wild card, lose a game, and you have some needs. Okay, I see supplementing. I might spend a little more in free agency there, right? Because it's like, okay, we need, or you get to the point. I was having this conversation on our Raiders show because obviously the Raiders need a quarterback still. They signed Gardner Minshew, and we had a caller who was talking about how, we should go get Russell Wilson, or we should have gotten Kirk Cousins. And I'm like, well, no, I don't think so. Now, if you had a team that was on the cusp of being championship material, yes, go sign the older quarterback who's clearly top 10 quarterback and is going to get you over the hump. So I think you use that money that way in free agency, but I agree with you that there has to be supplementing your draft positioning and your draft, the folks that you draft with the free agency, not the opposite, because you can't win that way because you just don't know. You can sign a free agent coming off a big season, does really well. It's one of the top free agents in the class, and they go out and they stink it up. I mean, a guy really well too, when he was with Los Angeles, the linebacker, I'm forgetting his name now. That went to the Raiders. No, that went to the Raiders. Oh my gosh, that tells you how well he did with the Raiders because I can't remember his name. But anyway, he goes from the Rams, has a great year, his career year, goes to the Raiders and was invisible.
Corey Littleton.
Littleton.
I saw you're thinking this year. Yeah.
Corey Littleton a couple of years ago was phenomenal with the Rams. And like everybody was excited from a Raider fan perspective when he got there. And then he did nothing. He just disappeared. It was crazy. It was like suddenly, like, you don't lose talent overnight, but sometimes guys, depending on the situation, it happens. So that's why. And look, it's a gamble in the draft too, Ryan. You can get a guy, you can get Caleb Williams. I think Caleb Williams will be a good pro quarterback, but let's just say for the sake of argument, he doesn't pan out. The Bears take him first, and how far does that set them back? So there's both sides of it, but I do think you have to, with the modern NFL and the financial piece of it, you have got to draft well. I'm not saying you're going to hit on everybody, but overwhelmingly you need to draft well at a 60-70% clip. You want those guys to be there into their second contract, or at least doing really well by the end of their first contract, or you find yourself in trouble.
So this is, I'm glad you brought this up. I was going to bring it up if it came kind of up, and it perfectly does, because you brought that up. Because this is interesting to me, and I totally agree with you. That's obviously the goal. I always see, you see it a lot, and I see it a lot today, obviously, because this is where these 2020 draft picks are now free agents that weren't first rounders.
Right.
And so you see a lot of either guys that cover or guys and gals that cover those teams, or even fans bringing up like, oh, wow, no players remaining from the 2020 draft class. And what a horrible draft. And, oh, our GM's terrible, this and that. And I'm not defending some of those draft classes, but what's interesting, Scott, is I did some more research into it, because on the surface, you would think, wow, 2020, it's only 4 years ago, and none of these guys are getting second contracts. It's actually a lot more. And I didn't do all 32 teams, so there might be one that's knocked out of the park, but it's very common. Almost everyone I looked at the Chiefs, who have won multiple Super Bowls. I looked at the Rams, who won a Super Bowl. I looked at Buffalo, who's always good. It is actually, when you just look at the 2020 class, almost all those teams have two max. Some of them, the Rams have 0. The Chiefs have 1. And guess what? He's on the franchise tag. That's Ladarius Sneed. Or no, they have 2. It's Sneed and then Willie Gay, who I don't know if they'll re-sign or not. The Bills have 1, AJ Espinoza, who they just re-signed. So it's actually a lot more common, surprisingly, that more often than not, your draftees don't make it to their second contract. So I think in reality, if we set the record straight, and again, it's not 100% across the board, but in reality, you really just need 2 to 3 players from a draft class to get their second contract, and then you can say you had a really good draft.
Yeah, but there's teams that ruin that thinking, right? And ruin people's expectations, like the Chiefs, their last 2 draft classes, right? You go back to their 2022 draft class into last year's Super Bowl, there was 6 of them starting in a Super Bowl, and 8 of them got significant time. And then this year, I think 5 of those still doing that. So that sort of ruins perception. So people see the Chiefs do this, like, why isn't my team doing that? Well, because it's an anomaly.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I think, look, that's where people get nervous about trading up for quarterbacks in the draft. Because when you look at quarterbacks and the history of quarterbacks in the first round, the total success rate is around 40 to 60%, depending what data you're going to use. And I mean that by, okay, do they go on to win a Super Bowl, which I don't necessarily believe is the fairest metric to judge a quarterback, because again, the quarterback is not the only reason you get to a Super Bowl and win one, right? Plenty of great quarterbacks never won Super Bowls, even though they got there multiple times. So you look at that and you say, well, then we shouldn't trade up for a quarterback. But in reality, look what happened. Again, the Chiefs ruined it for everybody. Look what happened with Mahomes. Look what happened with other quarterbacks where teams traded up and it was just the guy they needed. So that's the thing, like life, Ryan, right? So now I'll preach to you a little bit here, since I'm a bit older than you, which is, in life, you just don't know, right? So you have to decide, I'm going to take this calculated risk, i.e. on a draft pick or a free agent, and I'm going to decide how important it is to us, and if the risk is worth the reward on the other side, or if I risk it and it falls flat, is it going to kill us? And the reality is, I think when we were in Indianapolis for the combine a couple weeks ago, the GM of the Bills, whose name escapes me right now,
Brandon
Bean, thank you, talked about Josh Allen.
Not to be confused with Billy Bean.
Not to be confused with Moneyball. That's right.
Yes.
So we go to the press conference, and they're asking about the risk he took on Josh Allen. He said it wasn't a risk, because guess what? If I didn't risk it and I didn't get a quarterback, I could have been fired, because we didn't do well. We didn't find our quarterback. Then I take Josh Allen, and if he fell flat on his face and was a failure, I get fired. And I could have gotten fired either way. So what's the difference? You might as well take the risk and go for it. And I think that's where we are too. You saw it with your team in Denver. So they cut Russell Wilson, eating all that money. And everybody's caught up on the money. Oh, but what's more expensive? Holding back the entire franchise because you don't have the quarterback you want. And that's not an anti-Russell Wilson thing. It's just
what they believe.
They believe that. They need something else. So would you not be, well, we owe him so much money that we got to keep him? No, you don't, because they know they need their quarterback of the future to get to where they want to go. So to me, that's the risk. You cannot, there's no perfect decision. There's no perfect equation to say, hey, if we do X, Y, and Z, we're going to be in a better position. You have to go with what you believe. But I do think, back to our original point, I know we got on a tangent, is that you have to find the balance there between building from within. I'm a baseball guy, as you know, too. So it's like minor leagues. You develop players and then you go get free agents to supplement them. In the NFL now, with the salary cap, even though baseball doesn't have one, the idea that you need to have quality starters on both sides of the ball that are on rookie contracts. Okay. And then you supplement them with veterans at free agent. I think that's the winning mix. I think you've seen teams do it time and time again. Teams fail at it sometimes, but more than not, if you do and you have balance there, those teams seem to be successful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the last point, not to belabor it, is, and this is like with anything with life too, and any job out there, is learning how to balance being committed and being able to adapt. And sometimes people will view panicking and pivoting as adapting, and that's not always the case. If you've bailed on your commitment too early and not seen it through, and then just panicked and decided to totally 180 pivot, then that can blow up in your face. So the good franchises we see have conviction in their decisions and see them out, but also realize when that commitment has gone too far and is no longer working, and they're able to pivot and transition. I'll give you an example. And I know I don't always want to try to talk Rams on this national show, but it's easy for me since I cover them more. We saw them, a couple examples. So one, Todd Gurley was an MVP running back, right?
Yep.
Les Snead probably gave him a contract a year too early, an extension. He does that a lot, actually. He's a great GM, but one thing nationally that he doesn't get talked about is he overpays guys quite often. Gave Todd Gurley a huge contract. 1 year into that new contract, there was all the reports of, the knee issues. He was being used less in the McVay offense. They went to the Super Bowl still that year, but he just wasn't the same. And the next year he was really downfallen, but they owed him all this money. And you brought up Russell Wilson in Denver, and the Rams were kind of the first to do this. They cut bait. They said, you know what? It was a bad decision to extend him, cut bait, moved on. And then they still had 2 years of his dead money to pay him without him on the team. They moved on and then won a Super Bowl 2 years later. The other example of that is, as I kind of mentioned at the earlier show, their commitment to kind of one style of play for 4 years or whatever. And now this new pivot of, we're changing the offensive scheme. We're changing how we run the defense. We're changing how we allocate money. We're going to do more on offensive line versus skill players. Now we'll see. Last year's draft, I thought, was different than what they've done in years past. So I don't know if that helps at all, but it's that being committed to something like the Bills were with Josh Allen, but also knowing when it's time to fold them and pivot your decision-making.
Yeah.
But teams that do it too early, they don't see things through, and then they just are in that cycle every single 2 years.
Yeah, it seems that way. And it's crazy because you have to get over. You make a bad decision, you move on, right? And look, you go into it with the best intentions, and so you invest money, but at the end of the day, if it's not going to get you closer to your goal, which is to win a championship, then you got to cut loose. I think that's what you're going to see with the Giants. That's why I think the Giants are going to go get a quarterback, and I think they're going to say Daniel Jones. Maybe. Drew Lock. Yeah, he's there now, right?
Yeah.
So you see what they're doing. And so I know for fans, see, this is the other thing too. Fans are emotional about it. Like, when I'm rooting for a team that I'm emotional about, yes, you think of it that way, but it's a business, right? And so it's hard for fans to sometimes think of it as business. So when they see the Russell Wilson or the Todd Gurley or any of those big kind of cuts where people are like, wow, you paid them all that money. What a terrible decision. And yes, in hindsight, terrible decision. Okay. Some people believed it at the time. Others did not. Yep. It's easy to look back on it, but it's also does you more harm to sort of stick to your guns and say, nope, I'm sticking with the decision, even though I know it's a bad one. You just got to move on. So it'll be interesting. The last thing I want to talk about too was I got a lot of messages from folks about deals. When all these deals started coming down was about the money, right? So Kirk Cousins, $180 million, 4 years. That's the headline. Let's break it down a little bit too, because when you look at some of these top contracts that were paid out, the key here is looking at the fine print, okay? And all these numbers come from Sport Track, by the way. 4 years, $180 million. If you look at the contract of Kirk Cousins, not that it's anything to sneeze at, $100 million is guaranteed, so not $180. There's a potential out after 2026. So that means basically after his third year, the contract can turn into a 3-year, $135 million deal. Nothing is guaranteed past 26 because he'll be 39. He would be owed 45 million and a cap hit of about 57 million. So again, and you'll see these as the deals get filed, you'll start to see the real numbers. Baker Mayfield, same thing, 3 years, $100 million. He only gets half of that guaranteed. And there's a potential out after 2 seasons. Okay. Josh Jacobs, of course, running back market still is depressed. Headline 4 years, 48 million. And people are like, what? No, if you look at it, it's guaranteed next year for 12.5 million, but they have an out after 1 year. So really it's a $14.8 million deal, right? If you look at that from that perspective. Chris Jones, we talked about that deal, 5 years, 158 million. 95 is guaranteed. They have an out after the third season there too, as well. And then Brian Burns, of course, with the Giants going over from Carolina, 5 years, 141 million, but really only 87. So almost just above half of it is guaranteed with 3 years out as well too. And that's the thing with the NFL. It's not all guaranteed. So when you look at these deals, these guys are going to get a ton of money up front because especially from a bonus perspective, they get a lot of money because that doesn't count towards the cap. So that then the team can spread out the rest of it over several seasons so they don't take a big hit. And teams who are in contention, Ryan, as you know from your time in Los Angeles there with the Rams, they're gonna defer as much of it if they think they're in a window where they can win now. They're going to defer it to 2 or 3 years down the road so that they can put the team together that they want to try to go for it the next couple of years. And I think we're seeing that with a bunch of these big signings too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. And I want to get your point on this. So my neighbor is big baseball guy, which I know you are too. Huge baseball guy. So we talk all the time. And obviously I'm more of an NFL guy. And so he always brings up baseball's everything guaranteed. And, the contracts are guaranteed there and how NFL is not. And what's not. So I guess before I even go any further, just what's your take on it? Do you like the NFL is not guaranteed? Do you think it should be just everything fully guaranteed? Do it transparent?
No, I think so. So I'll answer it kind of through the back door. I think baseball contracts being guaranteed for as long as they are is not good for baseball. And it's good for the player. Don't get me wrong. So I'm not saying if I'm a player, I don't want guaranteed money because I would. I get it. But for teams to compete, and I know this because obviously, and if you could see the rest of my bookshelf here, which actually I can show people here, you'll see over here my Tony Gwynn. I'm a Padres fan, which is a painful existence. So, and part of the whole issue with the financial structure of baseball and big market versus small market teams is that they can't compete, right? So somebody's going to give out the contracts you saw the Dodgers do, right? To both of the pitchers, Japanese pitchers.
Yep.
What happens is you can't do that. That's all guaranteed money. They're on the hook for it. Okay.
Yep.
A team like the Pittsburgh Pirates can't guarantee that kind of money. First of all, they don't have the payroll, number one, but number two, they couldn't guarantee that long-term, no matter what it is. So in the NFL, from the player's perspective, I would also want guaranteed contracts. And they've talked about it for a long time. They've never gotten there because the owners have all the leverage. But you look at that, it does allow for more competitiveness. You want to call it parity or whatever. It allows for more competitiveness because you're not hooked for 5 year or 4 year to Josh Jacobs' contract. So if Josh Jacobs goes out and plays for the Packers next year and gains 500 yards, is injured a lot, I'm not saying he wasn't, don't wish it on him. Yeah. But if that's what happens, they can walk away after a year and be like, whew, okay, we lost the $13 million, but guess what? We don't have to pay another $50 million. So it's interesting. It benefits the players on the baseball side. It hurts the players on the NFL side, but it helps the teams on the NFL side, I think, being able to adjust and get out of bad contracts if a guy falls off a cliff and is no longer what they thought that he was.
Yeah. I'm always split on it because,
me too.
I'm always want to be pro player, and I get it. They're putting their bodies on the line, and
especially in football.
Sucks. Yeah, and it sucks when a guy gets hurt and all of a sudden he's done. His career's over. His contract doesn't even it gets voided if you have void years after. So I get all that. But from a competitive standpoint, and from just having to be a good GM, I don't want to throw any shade because I don't know as much baseball as you do, but if you're the Dodgers, is it really hard to be a GM of the Dodgers? You have all the money to play with. Let's just go get whoever we want.
Yeah.
If you're Billy Bean up at the Oakland Athletics, then you do have to be a skilled GM. Whereas the NFL, I think every GM has to be a talented GM. You have to have a money guy. You have to know how to work the massage the cap.
Yes.
So it makes for more gamesmanship in the league as a whole, besides just what happens on Thursdays, Sundays, and Mondays.
Yeah.
However, just my opinion, without really diving into numbers and doing all that, because I'm not a numbers guy, if they ever were to go to a guaranteed structure, I think you have to get rid of the salary cap then, just because, if your salary cap's at, what is it, 250, and you owe 5 players not in your team money, and they're accounting for. I know everyone talks about dead cap, but dead cap eventually runs out. Like if you have an 8-year contract and the guy's only plays 2 years and he's taking 6 years still of your salary cap, you're going to be the bottom of the league for those 6 years.
Right.
So they have to get rid of the cap. And then 2, we probably would never see a contract longer than 3 years. It'd all be 2 to 3 year deals.
It would all be 2. And so that's why I think players look at that and say, yeah, to your point about being pro player, especially in football, because of the injuries that they can sustain in such a violent sport, you want them to get guaranteed that money. But that's why those teams, I think, they're not going to give them the longevity, meaning guaranteed contracts over time. That's why you got to negotiate up front that big bonus, right? Yeah. So now, how much does somebody need to live? I don't know. I can't answer that question. We all live differently. But if I'm a kid coming out of college, for example, these top draft picks, they're going to get 30, 35 million bonus up front, their first contract, right? So, if I'm them, I'm like not spending very much money because I don't know how my career is going to end or how long it's going to last. So I think that getting that money up front and being smart with it, it's more important in the NFL because you're not guaranteed that money versus Bobby Bonilla, who's still getting $1 million from the New York Mets, even though he hasn't played in 12 years. So, that crazy stuff. So I think that that's the difference there. But again, it's a great subject, a great question. And there's kind of, like you said, you get pulled both directions because you want those guys to be protected. And again, because they put their bodies on the line, you want them to not be in a position where they're here and then suddenly they got no money because they blew out their knee and it can't be repaired. And the team says, "Oh, see you later. We don't have to pay you a cent." Yeah. So
the easiest way, not to cut you off, and again, I don't know all the semantics, but the NHL kind of does this where players are accounted for an injury, so they still get paid, but it doesn't count against the cap.
Count towards the cap.
If they miss certain amount, it's a certain amount of time they have to be out. But for instance, like Gabriel Landeskog hasn't played for 2 years. He's still getting paid. He's still under contract by the Avalanche, but his salary doesn't count by the cap, so they can go out and still be competitive and get guys. That would be the other thing if the NFL just said, "Hey, all right, we'll protect you against injury. It will count against the cap. That's as far as we'll go." Like that would probably be the easiest fix for this.
Yeah, and that's I do think that, and I think you shouldn't have to be punished if a guy sustains a career-ending injury. Why should the team should want to give them the money to make to make sure that they're good in life and fulfill what they're able to do, the responsibilities. But why should that count against you? I don't understand that. Maybe somebody's got an explanation. If you have an explanation, drop us a note and let us know. Maybe we'll get a guest on sometime to talk about that as we get towards the start of the NFL season. But good stuff. And Ryan, we're not done. I mean, listen, yes, the new year is now underway in the NFL. These deals are going to be completed. We're going to see a flurry of press releases between now and tomorrow. But we're going to see deals continue up until the draft. We'll start to see if anybody's maneuvering in the draft for picks and trades. So the NFL offseason, I mean, Combine, I think the Combine actually is not anywhere near as exciting as we've had over the last 2 days. You and I have had 14, 15-hour days because of the last 2 days. Mm-hmm. But to me, it's really exciting because now you get to see where your team is kind of jockeying and positioning themselves heading into next month into the draft in Detroit.
Yeah, exactly. So it's so much going on, and the draft's going to be awesome, and there'll still be moves to happen, and there'll still be some different changes made, and some of those big salary cap teams haven't actually spent a lot. You look at the Commanders, still have a lot of cap. The Patriots still have a lot of cap. So we'll see if they go get guys, or they're just going to go into the season as is and whatnot. So plenty to do, Scott. I love, I didn't even make this connection till right now, but I love, this is the NautZone, and similar to the Twilight Zone. Like you look at our screens, like you have a nice bluish hue. I have like this very bright yellow hue, like polar opposite color lightings here on the NautZone.
It's great for the viewer. It's great for the viewer out there. But yeah, and listen, I think that you talked about it earlier too in closing, which is the idea that, look, some teams won't spend their money yet, and you're like, what are you doing? But there's trades, right? There's veterans on other rosters that have salary implications for that roster, and maybe they're $1 million under the cap, but they have needs. So they're going to deal a veteran. And the Chargers are that way, right? The Chargers got under the cap, but they very well could trade. Yes, they're keeping Khalil Mack. Maybe they trade him. Maybe they trade Bosa, right? That's been the conversation. So you start to look at that, and that's why other teams keep some of the cap space. They might not win in free agency, but they might be sitting there and saying, okay, let's take a look at the trade market now. Who's available? Who can we go get and absorb? Because now we have this cap space. So that's what I would watch. I'd like to see, and I certainly believe we will see over the next several weeks, some big trades go down with those teams looking to unload some of those veteran contracts.
Yeah, totally agree. And it's going to be fun and always fast and furious. And maybe we'll get a little break into April, but most likely not. There's really no breaks here.
Not until June, right?
Yeah.
Until after minicamp. Then you get a little bit of a break when it goes into the dark mode for the NFL as they do until the training camp starts. So we'll see. But do us a favor. We appreciate you guys being with us today here on the NautZone, where we cover everything NFL. If you're watching us on YouTube, please do us a favor. Go subscribe to the Sportsnaut YouTube channel. We've got lots of great content up there every single day of the week, from NFL to NASCAR to baseball, you name it, MMA. We got everything up there. Go subscribe, hit the notifications bell so you know when we go live or when we have another show that goes live. We'd appreciate that very much. Also, make sure you drop us a thumbs up there. Do me a favor, too. Follow my good friend, my co-host here, Ryan Dyrud, at Ryan Dyrud LAFB on X.com. You can interact with him. You got questions about the NFL or about specifically the Los Angeles teams too. You can do that there. You can also check out conversations with me. That's right, at LV Gully, Gully, and I'd be happy to talk to you there as well. So it's going to be fun. We'll be back next week with, I'm sure, a little more fallout from the free agency period and what else is going on here, and too, what teams are in what cap space. We'll take a look at that. So if your favorite team is teetering on the edge of, what are they going to do? We'll talk a little bit about that as well. Don't forget to catch all the coverage around free agency up on sportsnaut.com. Also, check out LAFB as well, where you can check out the Los Angeles teams and what they're doing as far as the cap goes. Ryan, as always, my man, pleasure being with you here, and I can't wait to do it again next week.
Always a pleasure, my man. Thanks so much. Appreciate you.
All right. For the entire staff here at Sportsnaut, we want to thank you guys for joining us here for the NautZone. We will talk to you next Wednesday. Take care.